Right, this is going to be another episode of Snake and Banter. Our guest for this one is a return guest. It is Allan Hender, who technically, actually, what do you currently do? Like, I know, because here's the thing. Obviously, people see him on broadcast. He still does events. But I know you have that thing where you made that, like, British, whatever it's called, like Esports Alliance type thing or whatever. Do you still do that? Is that, like, still a thing? What is that? What's your role in that?
I mean, it still exists. It's not... There's no financial...
What was it? Was it like a coaches association or something, right?
No. It was...
What was it?
It was... Essentially, let's say in 2021 into 2022, there was a lot of issues in the scene, born of bad communication and a lot of problems with various TOs. So the idea was I'd bring together people that were professional. So it was me, Mighty Max, m0NESY, and Ash with the board. So we'd act above the players and we'd mediate conversations. We'd get if the players and the teams had a lot of problems with a tournament, we'd work together and then put that to the TOs.
So in terms of like functionality, it's sort of like a union basically, but like something like akin to that.
Kind of. I mean, there was no contract.
Yeah, sure, exactly.
There was no formal arrangement. It was more like,
but just oversight. To represent the UK's esports part in CS, basically.
Yeah, it was oversight and accountability was a big part because I certainly found that if a TO was doing something stupid or made some stupid ruling, just having people like me and m0NESY and Max on a call, suddenly they loosened up a lot.
Right.
And they just went back on a ruling.
Right.
They changed something.
Right, I see.
Or the main thing we bring, honestly, is just the contacts. So we had a problem end of 2023 where ProMod, who ran the UK Premiership, went under. And they went under before they paid out the prize money for one of their tournaments. So I just went straight through my back channels to ESL and said, the players aren't getting paid. What should we do about this? And then ESL actually stepped up and paid it themselves after they'd already paid the prize money to ProMod.
Oh, right. So they had to pay it twice, basically,
they actually paid it twice.
Yeah,
it was quite impressive. But I did that for a few years. To be honest, we haven't done much recently, but part of that is that there isn't the number of problems.
Right. Good problem to have then. Yeah.
So yeah, we did some good stuff. I'm not sure what the future holds, but we definitely conquered some good stuff, and players should benefit from it moving forwards.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, you've been on the show before. You know the format. What is the first good point we're going to, Allan?
Let's talk about Eternal Fire, because when you look at the new tournaments, the Valve ranking, the invites, and I sit there and I think, which team could benefit the most from this? Okay. Which team had a good 2024, and now that they don't have the barriers of not being a partner team or anything of this sort, is pretty well primed to jump up those rankings? And I think it's Eternal Fire. I think they played a really good last year. I think had they been a partner team, they would have taken a lot of big scalps and a lot of big tournaments. And I also quite like the roster move because I do think Calix was a bit of an anchor for them. So I like where the team is. I think they're very well primed to do well off this ranking. And I mean, I'd actually be surprised if they weren't top 10 for a lot of this year. And I don't think they're on a lot of people's radars. And not to mention, when you've got someone like Xantares is, I think I said it on a broadcast once, he's only silverware away from being regarded as an elite level superstar player. He's only results away from that. He has everything else. He's complete. He's vocal. He's incredibly good in high pressure games now, which he wasn't for his whole career. So I think they have all the pieces to be a consistent top 10 team and maybe even make the odd final in world class events. And they should get a lot of opportunities this year.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I don't think people are really talking about him too much. So good pick in general. For me, Eternal Fire, the first thing I have to do to pump the brakes is just think about, unfortunately, they've lost their best map by far in Vertigo. It was the one where I actually, dare I say it, I think I've actually enjoyed watching them play Vertigo more than almost anybody, and I'm including complexity in that list. Like, I just like the style that the seesaw that they would exercise more than complexity's kind of poppier plays. And so, yeah, the move seems to be good. I'll be real. I'm not really super familiar with Jota, but I will say that I can echo the sentiment that Alex at times, he was kind of like the worst player for stats test versus eye test, because you remember this odd round where he'll get this crazy snappy 3K, but then you kind of forget about all the times where he's on his bomb site and dies without getting a single kill. So I also still will never forget the fact that Vu discovered that Calyx aimed above headshot level and made that a YouTube video.
It's real. It actually is real. That one.
Funniest shit ever. Yeah. That's so funny. That was like, it's so eye opening. It's like, oh, that's probably why he's a bit inconsistent, isn't it? Like, who has to aim down usually? But beyond that, I think Eternal Fire have put themselves as an organization in an incredible position with the dissolve of the partner leagues, like you mentioned, because I made that. I think the YouTube video, if people are curious, back on my channel, is called like the Czech Steelers tier list. But really, it was just like who is like kind of rough estimates of everybody's salary in the tier 1 space. And Eternal Fire was damn near the bottom of that list. Like, I don't think they're getting paid a hell of a lot compared to some of these.
If you ever check on their website, I don't even know if they have sponsors, mate. They might have like one sponsor or something. It's not a big.
They have a couple. Right. Yeah, they just have like various, like ones that I really am not too familiar with. I'll just put it like that. Like, they don't have like a.
Yes.
I guess I shouldn't name a sponsor right now, but they don't have a big one. Or so, yeah. I think it's a really good point. Like, they're definitely going to be a team to look out for, and I think that the fact that they don't have to worry about like partner leagues is obviously huge for them for this year.
What's funny is everyone obviously thinks I'm going to have to like twist myself into a pretzel to make good points about Eternal Fire, but that's actually not true, because first of all, I do think, actually, here's a great analogy for you. I think Eternal Fire themselves had a very similar tracking to Na'Vi, because remember, the original like version of Eternal Fire peaked for the first major, PGL Copenhagen, where they made that top 8, but then they just didn't do anything against Na'Vi. Well, they weren't bad against Na'Vi, considering Na'Vi won the tournament, but at the time, everyone expected them to like, upset or maybe have a better game, and they couldn't get a map. Everyone at the time was like, oh my God. But if you ever watch that team, that was the team, if you go back on these episodes, where it was just like the most insane stats from Xantares ever. Like, if people don't know, he was one of the first people to have that thing where you're doing something insane, like 30% of all the opening kills, but you're having like 52% accuracy, like some like impossible numbers, unless you're like a complete beta, basically. So, and obviously anyone who's watching Xantares knows that isn't what he's doing. He's not just baiting on the outskirts and getting a free kill and then pulling back. He's the guy going in. Like, in fact, if you ever watch, if people don't know, I'll give you an analogy. This is why I actually do think the good angle I'm going to take for Eternal Fire here is the fucking skill level because of this move, Alan. Because if people don't know, first of all, I agree with you on the Xantares point. I'll give you a great example. If you want to know how Xantares plays and how good he is, guys, you know Flames from Vitality that you all tell me is amazing. Xantares is better than Flames. He basically plays like similar T-side style. He's just better. The same shit that Flames, when Flames just runs in like a site on Mirage, shoots 2 people, Xantares would have gotten 3 is my joke there. Like, he's actually unbelievable at that style of play, and he's almost done that thing that like Nico's done in his own career, where somehow parallel to whatever IGL you have, you develop your own game to have this like aspect where you clearly control your own movements, and you've just mastered your style of play. Like, I agree with Alan. He's just a very good player. Like, the obvious example and comparison for last year is Elysian Complexity, but that's actually where I'm going to form this good point, because the sad thing about Elysian Complexity is I never thought it was actually pure firepower in that team, but they clearly did lack firepower to correct mistakes in Complexity. Their problem was they would just be good in group stages. Then if people don't know, any like big playoff game or like match where you're supposed to prove yourself, they used to make every wrong decision in the late game and just like break down. This team, if anything, was actually quite skilled, actually. I thought in Complexity did like a bit of skill to like back up Elise. I think already Eternal Fire was all right, because in the latter half of the year, it wasn't just Xantares. It actually became like fucking Calyx stepped way up. That joke about like the left eye fucking model's almost real. Like, if you ever go and look when it comes in, he just becomes like 1.5 times better right after that, and suddenly does like Mouse 2019 Calyx shit. What's it shit and wins like 1v3s and fucking all his mid-round AWPings twice as good. It's actually bonkers. And so then in the second half of the year, it was more like the threat of Vertigo they used. They didn't even have to be Vertigo merchants anymore. If you notice, right, they were one of the teams a lot of people missed, got really good on Anubis, actually. That was a map they were really like challenging the top teams on. Then even in the middle of the pool, their maps like their Infernos and their Dust 2s and their Mirages, which everyone plays, they got pretty good at those, actually. They could win some T-sides. And even though I don't think they had the most inspired calling. Bear in mind, as far as I can tell, they're actually just a really skilled team trying to force. Essentially, here's the joke. This is the true Turkish super team. Because actually, as far as I can tell, every player in this team could be a 1 or 2 option in a different Turkish team if you split them apart. They really have now, except for Major, obviously, the IGL. But if people don't know, the Jota guy, I didn't watch him loads. I'm not going to pretend I did, Maui. But when I did watch Sangal, this was clearly the best player for me. Like, I told a load of people, the second I watched all those Sangal games where they're getting upsets, like, the eye test immediately jumps off the page. And then when the first thing you do is, I don't pretend to watch loads yet, I would go to, like, the Wikipedia and be like, he's Turkish. Bro, I actually feel sorry for him then, because how is he going to get into Eternal Fire? Like, he's going to have to try and take, like, fucking Xantares' spot or something. Like, he's fucked, isn't he? But instead, what they've done is, because, as you say, Maui, because Calix basically was in a really weird position. Because I agree with you. If you ever watch his game, the problem is, if you watch a match, he's not the star player, so they're not going to be on his POV often. So sometimes when they're on his POV, despite the fact he literally does, like Vu said, aim at the fucking, like, above people's heads, he still only gets headshot kills.
He's aiming at people Vu's height.
I genuinely don't understand it, because normally, you know, you aim and the idea is you make the shot easier and you get the headshot. He actually does not beyond them, but then flick onto their head and kill them. And so considering he was like the shit role player, it made him look actually way better than he was. Because the real problem was, that's all he does. He's not actually like a true, like, shit roles player. He's not fucking drop or perfect or something. So actually, the real problem here is this. I don't know how they'll integrate Jota. It does seem like they've got a load of star players, but I'll tell you what, here's the underrated part. If you're someone who thinks, oh, fucking sucks for Xantares, he has no help. Look, he doesn't have one of the best teams in the world. He probably should be in G2 or Vitality or something. But I'll tell you what, there's a lot of fucking skill in this team, in my opinion, right now. Like, raw ability to shoot people in the server. So if they can just get, again, like a standard, you know, Mirage, Dust 2, Anubis map pool or something, this team for real is actually one of the most skilled in Counter-Strike right now. Like, Alan's saying they can be top 10 like in placings. I'm not even joking. This team for real might be like the 5th best team in the whole world for, like, roster skill or something. It's actually underrated in that sense. So, look, I agree with you. The vertigo part's a problem because it was like the home map and a traditional one. And the joke with them was they weren't even just punish picking it. They liked that map, clearly. That's actually a map that they just had a vibe on the T side they liked. So, yeah, like, that's an issue. But at the same time, I actually do think this is a very interesting line. Like, put it this way, I don't personally think this will... Like, I think what they showed with the last lineup at that EPL where they... By the way, they did almost beat Na'Vi. Like, I actually think they actually outplayed Na'Vi in that series. Just Na'Vi had fucking people who could do amazing shit, like fucking Gel and Bit and all those players, you know. So, but what I'd say is this, they will be a really dangerous... Like, this is the team, for example, in the Swiss BO1, you do not want to draw if you're a top 5 team. This is exactly the team that will get you, bro, in that. Because they're going to be in the middle of the map pool where you're on a shared map like a fucking Inferno, like I'm saying. And this team, all they need is 3 of their players to just have that day where they just fucking pop at heads and you could actually lose. As like a G2 advice, you could lose to this team. So that, I'll give you this, that's exciting. Whereas before, to me, it was just like the first half of last year, it did look like the Xantares prison, and it did look like it's just all about the fact they're Turkish or whatever, whereas you can ignore all that jazz. We joke about these things on Twitter on the show, but ignore that. There's actually some skilled players in this team. Again, as an upset merchants, I actually think I could fuck with this team. I'll enjoy watching them. They look good.
Yeah. I mean, their ceiling is ridiculous.
Yeah.
If you actually think about the ceiling of teams,
but this way, I thought it was a fluke.
2 or 3 teams in the world.
This team absolutely can be in the major playoffs, mate. That's not even like a crazy statement. I think they completely could be. Yeah.
They should be. They should. Their goal should now be top 4s.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Which, think about, even in the past of any Xantares team, that would have been a crazy concept. Even big, they were online merchants. No one ever would have said you should be in the semi-final of a major. So, in a fucked up look, the sad thing is, obviously, as we've alluded to, they'll never get the money, unfortunately. That's the downside if you're someone like Xantares. But by the way, fair play to Xantares that he's finally actually codified it like Tabson and just said, no, I am literally just doing this to play with my countrymen. Yep. By the way, if you say that, then I'm in on it. Okay. And I'm cool with that at that point in time. If you just say it's not about money, I just want to make Turkey great or whatever, okay, go for it then, mate. At least I know the project. At least I know you're not like not getting offers or something. So I'm fine with that. As long as that's his mission, go for it.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning, like, the team play kind of chemistry side is...
Oh, that's the thing we should say, Alan. I've just realised. In theory, if this team actually frags, that will let Xantares get a HL TV top 20 type placing again. Like, get like a bigger one. He could actually maybe be like 14th or 12th or something. Maybe he can get higher, actually. Because, he was kind of capped, wasn't he? Him and Elise were capped. I know, but we all know how it's calculated, so none of us really complain. But maybe the way's actually open to be like 10th now or something, right?
I mean, if you actually sat down and made like an eye test list, he's probably top 10. And
I think so. There's nothing unfair about that.
For the last 5 years, to be honest. I think Eternal Fire gets a bad rep strategically. I think they obviously had that period what would it have been, maybe 2021 to 2023, where they're just changing lineup.
Oh,
like
sure. Yes.
I mean, it was every 2 months there was a lineup change. They have one bad placing, majors in, majors out. Players like xFloud go in and out, and now xFloud looks like a fantastic player.
He's also on Sangal, if people don't know, he was at least.
Yeah. Then when Wicadia came in, that was the big change for this team, because it just moved the roles around, and suddenly it actually made sense.
Yes.
Suddenly you had somebody. Wicadia plays a lot of like opening frag roles. He's like the spearhead for the team. He's just someone that will run in without regard, and you don't need a super experienced player to do that. And it just lets everyone else slot in so well. And I think alongside that, they finally realized that, Major might not be the best in-game leader in the world, but if we're going to be Turkish, we have to have him on our team. There is just no other option.
Sure. Yeah, of course. There's no one, yeah.
The only other choice might be making it Xantares, but he's just such a good player. I don't think you could go down that route.
Yes, that's like a twists move, isn't it? Like, you don't want to risk it at that point,
The team now has had a pretty stable lineup for approaching 2 years, and that alone is unbelievable. Turkish team,
absolutely,
been around for 2 years, and I suspect part of the Calyx change is that when Wicadia came in, it's like, well, we've got Wicadia, Woxig's always a bit all over the shop. We might need another experienced player, so let's have Calyx. At least he's going to bring stuff outside of just gameplay. But now that Wicadia's played for approaching 2 years at this level, it's probably not such a big problem. And now they can lean a different way and say, okay, let's upgrade some skill. So I like the Jota move. He wasn't, for me, it was probably xFloud was the best player on that team.
Fair enough.
So my hunch would be that it's role-wise.
Right.
They went for Jota, which, and then there's Soulfly as well on out in the ether. So I'm guessing it's all about roles. And if it is, that is a good sign, because that means they've actually thought about it, rather than just picking up the best player on the market, which they would have done 2 years ago. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be excited about this team, and again, we would be surprised if they're not competing for playoffs in the elite event.
By the way, I'll even say this: if people think I just hate Eternal Fire, they actually gave a bad showing of themselves at that last major. They're a much better team than that. They on paper absolutely should have been in the playoffs if they'd have played well. Like I have to say, the team that did that EPL run and even the Bet Boom finals, that team was beating like real world class teams. They almost did beat Navi in a best of 5, for fuck's sake. Right, okay then, Maui, what is your good point? What are we going to here? By the way, I'll just say this now. Don't worry, I've got the timing down, so just keep going. I'll keep it moving.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that right now, but okay, yeah. My good point is just that I really actually think that this bounty format is pretty sick. Like we've been waiting for a format that just feels like it raises the stakes for some time, and in a single elimination tournament where everybody is picking their opponent, other than the lower seeds are picking their higher seeded opponent. I think that is a fantastic idea, and I feel like the overall kind of like money issue, or like how much you bank versus how much you keep stuff, might kind of throw people awry at the beginning when they're trying to understand the format and like what the challenging means, and like betting how much you've made and stuff like that. That stuff, I kind of get it, and you probably should watch the broadcast, because I don't want to use this time to be like as an explainer. I just think that in general, creating stakes because of what the teams actually want is very interesting, especially in the like higher, like the teams that are kind of like in the middle seeds that are picking each other for matchup reasons and things like that. I think that's really cool. Also, at the one thing that I don't think anybody's really picked up on, or we haven't really discussed as much as we could have on the desk, is that you're actually also picking teams knowing the time slot you're going to play. So you actually know if you pick, say, like G2, like bait pick G2. They said they wanted to pick G2 just because they thought they sensed weakness on that roster.
Okay.
And they almost made it happen.
Yeah,
but another reason they could have picked him is because they see that the matchup is the last one of the first round. Like they would have had 3 extra days to practice leading into that matchup. And so, for example, like Madger said on the draft show yesterday, that's a reason that they went for their pick, because they knew they would have a few more days to prep. And on the other hand, like Heroic playing Liquid right now as we record this one, Saw got to pick Liquid knowing that Liquid was going to only have like 8 hours to prep because the draft show happened so late. And so like for people that are like giga grinders and preppers, they can actually think about it, if they know that they're going to have the first pick in the next round, they can pick a favorite in air quotes that they know is going to have to play the first match of the next day, and then they can go spend they can pull an all-nighter.
I didn't even know that was an angle. Okay, you can sort of force them into a bad spot, right? Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll see. I mean, by the time this is published, the Heroic Liquid game will be over. But if Heroic wins that game, at the end of this, I think a big reason for it is probably because Saw just was in the lab, and because he also knew who he was going to pick.
Right.
Liquid didn't know they were going to play Heroic until he publicly made the pick, but Saw had probably an extra 12 hours at least to know who am I going to play in this time slot. So I think it's really cool in those kinds of aspects too. So it also just gives an added bonus for an underdog, because so many times the underdog just isn't really going to have a true case to beat the favorite. But if they have this kind of prep angle, that could actually lift them up.
Okay. What do you think, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, it's, everyone will be saying it, breath of fresh air. I think one aspect, we'll obviously touch on it maybe a bit later on a different topic, but it does also quickly expose really wrong rankings, particularly for the top teams, because if someone's ranked way too high, then you can just pick them. And you'll play a much easier opponent than you would have in a traditional seeding system. I think I would like to see more events like this. I know you can speak to this, Duncan. I know Flashpoint was considering having teams choose their group teams between rounds.
In theory, we did, but it's just it wasn't a big thing. And
it didn't get done because we didn't have enough repeat groups.
But by the way, this is why we did it though, because obviously we wanted people to have a thing where you could create drama, or you could call out the big team, or vice versa. They could be and obviously in ours we allowed top seeds to pick and stuff. But yeah, it was the idea you could create actual tension and drama and rivalries and call people out. Yeah.
Especially in the modern world where social media is such a huge thing around the games itself. I mean, a sport, anything like MMA or boxing, they're really social media kind of focal points for a few minutes.
Oh, mate, unironically, if people don't know, one of the actual best fighters ever in the UFC was that guy, Mighty Mouse. He used to fight at the really low weights. And the reason he's not in the UFC is he just didn't have hype, mate. And he wasn't a guy who could make these crazy wrestling narratives. And his problem was he was mega at the sport, by the way. But the problem is, Counter-Strike is an eyeballs sport. I'm sorry, it is. It's not about purity at this point in time. We wouldn't be able to have tournaments if it was only on who the best teams are. So in a fucked up way, you're right. This is like MMA, mate. That's the vibe of it. Yeah.
I mean, the amount of angles it opens up for picking a team, and then obviously if you're the lower ranked team, you can notify your socials teams ahead of time, get stuff ready. And
by the way, it's perfect for the heroics of the world, the people who already were leaning into that shit, and NIP, the ones with the social medias are already ready for the Zoomer posts. This is their dream format. They're going to fucking earn their paycheck this month,
Yeah, exactly. You need to just unleash them.
Yes, exactly.
That's ridiculous stuff. It just opens up loads of angles there, and in a year now where I suspect a lot of formats are going to be pretty close because of how
most of them are all the same. It's basically like a major type format for most of them, right?
Yeah. So in that world, having something that's so different alone is its attraction. And obviously a lot of TOs this year are going to have to work pretty hard to look different. So it sets a good standards at the start of the year. So hopefully more events down the line have an angle like this, because just having that extra layer on top of the games, it's a bit like betting, isn't it? I mean, it just adds another layer of stakes, another layer of jeopardy. So I think I'm all for it. I'm not sure I'd want it, obviously, for every event of the year. I wouldn't want this in a major, but, why not? A couple times a year, let's have something that's a bit different.
I've always said to people, I actually thought that the only reason Blast groups, where it was spring and fall, which were always the first thing of the season, the only reason they worked before is because they actually didn't have insane stakes, because you could still come through the bazillion last chance matches. You go through the showdown if you were amazing. So I actually always thought, if anything, we all forgave the fact that it wasn't a very compelling tournament, because the real problem I've always said is, it was a normal land split in two. You just took the group stage at the beginning, and then you waited a few months and had the finals and the playoffs. But the problem is that doesn't give you the same feeling as a tournament like Katowice, where you go straight from the groups into the playoffs. It never gave you the continuation of the story. So I always felt like it wasn't that great a format actually in the past, where they had the groups separately. So I just treated it essentially as this is an official warm-up for your roster, sort of see if you're any good, test. I even think, by the way, people did test things out, like test map vetoes and stuff and just shenanigans and whatnot. But I never thought it was real CS anyway. So essentially, to me, if the first tournament tournament was like this each time, this is like we're warming up into the scene, because no one is going to treat these results with like the life and death. It's like, no one at the end of the year is going to be weighing up who the team of the year is. Like, oh, but remember when they lost that like bounty game? No, that the best part is for the top teams, I don't think the stakes are ridiculous. I actually think they've designed this quite well to make it fair for the top teams, because obviously for the lower teams it's awesome. If you don't know the amounts you can win, by the way, guys, that's the problem, is you're all thinking of it just as like you win the status of beating that opponent. Like, obviously, I agree, by the way, Bait literally had G2's balls on the fucking table and the cleaver coming down like that, and m0NESY basically just jumped in like Neo from the Matrix and just saved the whole game for them. Don't worry, we'll get to G2 later. But basically, if you don't know, Bait would have won 60 grand if they'd have completed that fucking Dust 2 game at the end. And BetBoom, who did beat Mouse, won 30 grand for that match. Like, first of all, if you're the lower team, that is actually legit money. Like, that is a nice reward if you are some of these squads. Like, for Bait, that's not fucking chicken feed, man. That's real money. And then also, here's the difference. Even though it won't like wreck you if you were G2 and you'd lost that game. Look, some people would have wigged out, but I don't think anyone who thinks of like pro CS would think that changes whether they can win the major or kind of eats or something. But at the same time, though, it makes you care about that match if you're G2 in a way you don't if it's a random like Blast group stage match or just like, the first match in Pro League. Like, that doesn't have the same stakes. Like, haven't we all complained a million times about the fact that FaZe Clan almost has maximised being like a slacker and just figure out like, no, what time do I have to be at work? Like 11, I'll be there at 10:59. Like, that's what they do. Like, in this analogy, they actually arrive at 1 minute past 11 and then they're just still okay. Right? In this world, right, the reason there are some stakes if you're the top team, you don't really lose in the circuit, but you're going to look silly, because the best part is because they picked you, it's like doubly worse that you lost. It wasn't that it was just like, oh, who's that team? Oh, we're in this group and they're just weird. They picked you, which implies like, I think I can beat. It doesn't really. Like, by the way, no one's pretending Imperial Female thought they were beating Army. But the point is, if you then did beat them, it's like doubly gangster. And I think in the way it makes the top team have to try harder, because it's more humiliating if you lose because they picked you and did that. Like, that's why the Bait one would have been genius, because no pleb thinks Bait could do it, but then they really almost did. And then think about if you're the G2 players, I can only imagine how some of them were feeling in that last map. Like, fuck, is this how my career starts in G2? Bloody hell. They were just in the semis of the major. Like, yeah, you've actually given us stakes in a tournament, which as far as I can tell, if you're a top team, doesn't have stakes for you. Like, this is almost like has exhibition vibes. And I've always said, if people don't know, I'm actually totally cool. This is a bizarre thing people don't know about me. I don't want the sport to be like Formula One, where every tournament's identical, just in a different location. I'm totally cool with having mixed formats. Like, I actually even like the idea I've told in the past of almost like tennis. Like, each circuit would have its own different one. Maybe like, I'll make it up randomly. Maybe Blast single limb, but TSL's double a limb, and then PGL does, I don't know, Swiss or something. I'd be totally fine with that, because I actually think like tennis, it would show different, who succeeds better in a Swiss format, who does better in double a limb. So in that world, I've always said, if you have too many tournaments, because we're almost, by the way, with this calendar, back in like 2019 and before, aren't we, boys, where there's like 30 tournaments or 20 tournaments and like people could in theory go to. Well, if you want to make an exhibition tournament, make it a unique format. Like, look, I wasn't a big fan of it back in the day, but I understood why ESL did those ones at Gamescom where you picked your opponent. It was all the conspiracy. Because again, for a not serious tournament, it gave an angle that made it sort of fun. I tell you what, we can all still to this day remember when they did do stuff like the conspiracy meant, like, the third best team didn't even get to come third because they all made them play all the other good teams and then come fucking fifth or whatever. And then, Mouse could come like third, even though they weren't, whatever teams it was back then. It actually did have a thing. And similarly, look, it didn't happen here, but I'll guarantee you the difference is in 9 months, no one will go, well, of course, I knew G2 was shit because they lost to Bait if they'd have lost. But you would remember that Bait beat them and picked them and won 60k. I think that part actually would be memorable. So I'm with you. It gives sort of almost like stakes for the lower teams, imaginary stakes for the real teams. And then also, I never thought Blast Groups was that great anyway. So since we're going to have 1 billion tournaments this year, boys, and we're going to get to see a massive sample size of games, I'm actually cool with this. This is one of the times where I'm okay. I don't mind that this is the format. It's all good. I'm in. Right, okay, obviously I'll just forward to my point. My good point, by the way, is I'm just going to pick a roster move. I actually think an underrated aspect is I've seen loads of discussion about Elish to FaZe and, what's going on at Falcons, but the weirdest one to me is people talk about the ropz to Vitality move, but the part I can't believe that no one brings up is this. Bro, I never saw that move coming at all. I never even knew ropz would want to do that move. That's why I was quite interested in all this discussion about, did he want to stay in FaZe first? Did FaZe not give him the contract? Did he just want more firepower? Would he have stayed? Because here's the thing. Why wasn't this a move everyone was thinking about? Because, bro, this is crazy. No one did this. Because we all in our brains thought, well, ropz likes Carrigan and ropz is FaZe and he's Mr. FaZe. And obviously you wouldn't cut him if you're FaZe. So we all just looked at FaZe from every other position almost except ropz and Carrigan. Like, people were willing to cut Raid and then Brokey at the end and Frozen. Look, some people just said Frozen because they don't watch the fucking game. By the way, he should never have been cut ever in that team. But you know what idiots are like. They thought he should, I don't know, be better than he was or something. Fucking, he's still like a 1.1 rating every tournament almost, mate. I don't even know what people hate on. But I will say this. As a result, I don't think anyone really considered what if ropz did go to Vitality. Because remember, I've heard behind the scenes, it's true, that most of the problems in Vitality, let's just say, originate with Spinx. It might not all be his, but let's say they all originate with him. And I'm sorry, this is one of the rare times where a roster move does fix everything. If the problems all originate from that guy, like, yes, removing him from the room and quarantining him will absolutely help you in this analogy. And the problem people hadn't thought of is, when everyone thought, what if it, because remember, it was initially billed as Spinx will leave, like, he doesn't want Vitality. So everyone was always thinking, well, what play could he bring in? And if you remember, the original rumour around Cologne was that whack one, like, Hunter replaces him. Like, what? Like no, I don't know anyone who wanted that move. What's mad is, I actually think ropz is like a side grade with upside. It's insane. I think you lose nothing that you got from Spinx, because I actually think ropz is one of the only players who plays that lurky style, which is good. But I even add this in. ropz has a clutch factor Spinx does not. I actually think people aren't realising. Like, by the way, the people I can't believe aren't like singing from the rooftops is Zemu fans. Guys, I've got some good news for you. If he actually plays like he has the last 5 years, and ropz plays, he doesn't even have to be as good at the major, like somewhere between real ropz and the major ropz, this team's going to win a lot of fucking trophies. Like, if you have Zemu to open the game and to win all the group, and this guy can be your closer, bro, that could be one of the all-time duos. I think that duo could, like, they don't have to step on each other's feet at all. I think they're both mega motivated to win again. I actually think this move's a bagger. I think people have missed it because they wanted things like Jim Fat in the team, or they wanted Apex out, or I don't know, who knows what the fuck people wanted from this offseason now. I feel like people had a million weird motivations, but this has sort of crept up on us. I actually think this could end up being like roster move of the year or something, boys. I think it's a banger, personally. I don't know what the downside is. I think it's actually fire for everyone involved. It's a great move. I didn't see it myself, though. I tell you what, I'm pleasantly surprised, though. I think it's going to work really well. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean,
go
I
for
guess
it.
the only downside is he costs a bit more.
Okay.
I imagine.
Okay.
Spinx. Yeah, certainly with Spinx. I mean, you guys remember when he first came into Vitality, they had a lot of time where it wasn't working.
Yes.
A lot of time. I remember you were a fairly vocal critic, Maui, when he was first in that team. And I think they probably changed the roles a lot, because whatever he was doing on ENCE wasn't working on Vitality, and they couldn't get it to translate. And they did figure it out, I guess, after a year or so, and Spinx was playing better Counter-Strike. But as Duncan says, in terms of someone who could just slip into their roles immediately and be good, ropz is incredible. And ropz is such a complete player. That's the thing about Spinx. It took them ages to get him working. And he only worked into his narrow hole in this team is the only place he functioned really well. ropz, I know he plays a lot of anchor spots. He likes to be a very reactive player. He could play other roles if he needed to, and he'd still be world-class. It's just that on FaZe, for example, it made a lot of sense to be in those positions. So I just think with the options you have on this team now, with the roles you could play, with how you're going to play mid-round with a player of ropz' experience, yeah, maybe he's not as flashy as some young and up-and-coming player as kind of Duncan was hinting at. But in terms of someone who could change you from almost winning elite level tournaments, or almost winning majors to put you over the line, it's as close to a slam dunk as I've seen in moves for a long time. And whoever is GMing for Vitality, this is what roster moves should be.
Yeah, I agree.
It should be who's out of contract, who wants to move, who makes sense, who on our team is failing and looking at roles that could pick up. It's a masterclass. It's one of those moves where you just look at it and you're like, whoever decided this knew what they were doing, and we don't always say that.
No, of course not.
We don't always say that with moves. So yeah, a good move, and I think we'd all be stunned if it didn't work out quite well.
I feel like this is going to help them out a lot on CT side primarily, where Spinx to me was so allergic to sitting on a bomb site. And I know some people, I've made this statement before on Twitter, and people are like, well, he's a rotator, he shouldn't be on a bomb site. Frequently, if you watch a whole round of Counter-Strike, which I know these people aren't doing, you actually end up on a bomb site, even as a rotator, to help defend with your anchor. Like, that just happens. But Spinx would always actually try to just push. Like, I noticed pretty early when he was playing with Vitality that if they did stick him on a bomb site, he's just not the best, in all honesty, at playing around a single piece of cover and just kind of getting that one kill like an anchor. Like, think Magician Pit, for example. Like, he's going to jiggle the guy out a little bit, freeze him in his place, then wide swing him as soon as the guy is actually trying to approach and just get the one kill that he needs to, you know? Like, whereas Spinx, like, he just always wanted to push. And one of my guys in my like Twitter community found this, and he kind of like worked in with the tweet I made before about Spinx, where it was like, he calls them like bozo deaths, where if you're in a man advantage situation, he parsed all of the demos between teams that were in the top 5 in ranking, and he actually found that Spinx gave up just kind of like, compared to ropz, a pretty drastically higher number of bozo deaths, which in turn are like, you're in a man advantage or better, like 5v3, 4v3, doesn't matter, and your team actually ends up losing the round. Win-loss condition is actually met.
Okay.
Yeah, and so Spinx is just like on T side he's pretty good, but on CT side he was quite bad at this. So, and this kind of just confirms everything that I was seeing with Spinx, where it's just like, he just needs to push. And like in CS:GO, he had really good ideas about timings, for example, and he would find so many flanks. Like if you remember with m0NESY, like he was so good at just pushing on CT side with like 25 seconds left, and either he's gonna find the opponents who are like trying to go through that spot that he's pushing through, or he's gonna just pull off a flank. He was so in tune with the timings, but lately in CS2, I'd say like the last 6 months, he definitely lost that timing, that sense, and people just waited for him. Like people would just wait outside his bomb site, they just hold, kill him, and now you have an entry onto a bomb site that now just has m0NESY, and it's like, come on, like m0NESY can only do so much there. So I think it's a great move because ropz can just hold his position a lot longer, and he's a lot more confident with just sticking around, and because man, like ropz is like the master at just like holding a position, like doing the timing peaks and just making sure like every peak is like with the full focus and everything like that. He's so good when he's trained onto an angle.
I'll just give everyone like the most noob version of like, you know, those 3 key points for the game. Here's what you want to watch for Vitality this year. You know, I have a metric, right, that gives away if you actually believe in the roster of a team, or if you think like they have like I'll give you an example. If you watch Spirit play around, guys, and I insert different names as to who's alive in a 2vx, your feelings about whether they can win this round will be radically different, right? Here's the thing you have to think of now. Imagine a round where ropz and z1w are in a 2vx. Bro, every round is winnable. Like every single possible permutation of that. Like this could actually give like an extra gear to Vitality. And as Allan said, the part people missed about Vitality because they only won 1 trophy is, bro, it felt like they were like, you could have just skipped them to the semi-finals of every tournament. Yeah, somehow they lost those matches. I don't know how, but they were absolutely the smallest margin from being like the team of the year for me. Like they could have won almost every tournament last year. Like, so I think that's why I'm not even saying ropz has to be better than Spinx, by the way. But if you can just bring this aspect to their game, that puts them over the top. Because remember, you do have z1w. Like, you're going to get to all the playoffs. You're going to, by the way, in a best of 3, I always even say the only way you can actually have z1w be totally shit as best of 3 is you have to win 2-0. Like, if you give him time, he always wakes up. It depends, does he get there in time? So I think you add in ropz, mate, the sky's the limit for this team. That's why it's so cool for people who I do think are underrated, like Apex and stuff, and people who call for their heads. m0NESY. I think these people are going to look awesome in their roles this year, and you're all going to suddenly change your tune, and you're going to be going IGL of the year and all that shit. It's going to be awesome. I can't wait. I actually think, like I said, I didn't see this move myself at all, but I think it's a slam dunk once you see it in hindsight. It's like, yeah, like Allan said, like this is fucking, it might seem obvious, but I guess it wasn't because none of us saw it, but it's a slam dunk for the GM. Yeah. Even if it didn't work out, I like the idea. I just like what he attempted. I think it makes a lot of sense. Right. Let's go on now to your bad point, Allan. What are we doing here? What are we picking? We're
going to talk about G2 and their new look roster versus rosters in the past, and we're going to call this the m0NESY fallacy. And the m0NESY fallacy
okay, I love it. Okay,
is when you take a young, somewhat inexperienced player, at least at elite level play, and you think they're going to translate immediately to good Counter-Strike. And the reason it's a fallacy is because m0NESY was the exception to the rule. He was absolutely unbelievable.
Sure, yeah.
Day one at Katowice. In 2022. So he was incredibly good from day one to a level that only someone like Donk maybe has matched since. So that works out for them. And obviously moving forwards, Nexa goes out, m0NESY comes in. I still think the jury's a little bit out on m0NESY. I'm not totally sure what they're going to do with the roles. I haven't played enough, CS yet to determine that. And now they've gone for Heavy God, obviously in the absence of Nico, even if it's not a straight 1-to-1 swap. And I look at m0NESY and Heavy God, and I say, I think this might be too much of a risk. I think having seen m0NESY work so well, maybe you fooled yourself a little bit, but these are two players that are pretty green at this level of competition. And when you're losing someone of Nico's caliber, maybe I wanted something a little bit more in terms of experience. Okay. So, and then obviously a sideline to this discussion is obviously, I think over last year, particularly with some of m0NESY's comments, is a lot of people are talking about age of lineups and having young players. And I'm not on board with that really at all. I don't think there's massive credence to
as in people are scared to have like the average age be too high, basically.
The thing is, obviously, on average, on a entire bell curve, yes, you probably need some younger players. They are on average going to be more skilled. They're going to have more time, but it doesn't mean in every case.
Yes.
And obviously, when you're selecting players, you're doing it on a case by case basis. So I think the narrative that teams have to go for young players, they can't go for experienced players. They can't take a skill downgrade, maybe even to have, like for example, let's say Vitality picks up ropz. And ropz wasn't actually as skilled as Spinx, but he's more solid. He's a better communicator. He's a more complete player. We'd probably still be sitting here and saying that's a good move for this team.
Yeah.
Obviously, for them, it's a slam dunk because ropz is a fantastic player. But even if it was a slight downgrade in terms of skill, he brings so much more to the game than just that. And I look at this G2 team, and that is my fear, is that you've got too many new pieces. And even someone like m0NESY, I can't imagine in terms of being a leadership figure, he's that sort of person. So I just think they've lent too much into going for young players, and then maybe they should have taken a downgrade and got at least one player that was more experienced. That is my fear for this team for at least the first half of this year.
The fact that they lost a big voice with Nico is the concern for me here. So I guess when they bring in Heavy God, I think Heavy God is fantastic, but I feel like if you actually had this exact same 4-man lineup with Hunter, m0NESY, ropz, and Heavy God, and the IGL instead of Snacks is Kerrigan, I think it would work out. I wouldn't actually be worried. I think if it's even even someone like Apex, I think it could work out pretty well. I like the IGLs that I rate highly, I think could handle this kind of stuff. But watching Snacks, even in sometimes winning maps, have these ridiculously bad calls, like just diabolically bad calls. That's when I'm like, oh wait, that hot take about Heavy God being a top 20 player that I'm holding, like that I have, is just that, man, the team might actually not have enough success for him to get there. Like, I think individually as an anchor, I think as an anchor individual, like, there's no question in my mind he should be a top 20 player. But it's just like, this might not be the right environment for him because of voice and something because of the lack of voices, I guess. And I was watching the player cams a lot through some of the rounds with G2 because I was wondering, like, okay, because when we're in the blast green room, we don't hear the comms, all of them or anything like that, or we don't really hear them at all anymore. They don't do that, but we have the player cams. We have all 10 player cams like sitting right in front of us as well. And so I was just like watching rounds and just seeing who's talking the most. Hunter's talking the most. Hunter is talking the most for sure on this team right now. Before the round starts, I'm seeing m0NESY speak a lot. And then when the round's live, I'm seeing Hunter talking way more than Snacks. So it's almost like Hunter is kind of he's filling that Nico role where Nico was definitely the secondary, maybe even you could say like sliding to primary caller for the past G2. But now I think that guy is Hunter. But I just wish it was just a more experienced in-game leader to put it all together with Hunter. So yeah, I think there is cause for concern with Heavy God being a replacement for Nico, not in terms of even skill or fit, because it allows m0NESY to be freed up for me, but definitely in terms of voice, because I know he's a great soldier, but I don't know if he's really a great, he's not like a leader or anything for me yet.
Yeah, I actually have to say I wasn't particularly impressed with the off-season from G2 either, mainly because, look, On the one hand, I have to say, I'll give them a 10 out of 10 that they kept m0NESY somehow. Look, even though people are saying, it's only for a limited sample, but it doesn't matter. They're going to get one season at least more out of m0NESY. That's more than I thought they would get. Like, if people don't know, it wasn't even just the whole Falcons thing. I think people got too distracted from that. If you'd been following the m0NESY saga for the last year plus, it was that if not Falcons, he's going to one of these Russian teams. Like, there was all those rumors kept leaking out of the scene, even from like that guy who's literally his friend, who's like a streamer, that like, he was talking to Cloud9, or maybe he'd be open to like a VP move or something, and people kept hinting at that over and over again. Now, I will say this rumor that people just put out now, that apparently G2 tried to get bit for him. Look, I'll say this. That's another move no one thought on paper, because you think to yourself, well, no one can leave Na'Vi, can they? But I will say, even though you didn't pull it off, it was like a fantasy move. Here's the props. I'm not usually giving the GM of G2 credit, but if he had have pulled that off, that would have been one of the steals of the season, because that would be not only insane because they want to play together, but the fucking roles would be incredible. Imagine bringing Bit in as your anchor. Like, by the way, it's only the fact that like fucking other super sick players exist that this guy isn't the automatic anchor of the year. He was really good at that role. So I found it interesting that in the end, they sort of ended up on like not a bad roster, but the problem is, I think to Alan's point, here's the thing: on paper, this roster looks good. It actually it does look like, but it's, I would normally just say, right, well, Snacks, now you've got no excuse, mate. The problem is, before, people could tell you, well, it's just because you've got an eco and m0NESY. You don't have an eco and m0NESY scenario now. Like, at the end of the day, m0NESY is good, but he hasn't become an eco yet, and no one knows if he ever will be. And Heavy God's good, and it makes sense in terms of the CT roles, but I don't know actually how this will operate in this team. Like, for example, essentially, how is he going to work being like the third best player or something? Or again, he tried to be like IGL and something. Is he going to have a voice in this squad? Like, that's the part that I found. I thought there was a lot of unanswered questions when he had this guy in. And also, to Alan's point, he's one of those people who I think has proved it at the level he's at, but he actually hasn't had many chances at, like, he hasn't had many playoff games himself, by the way, guys. He hasn't had many chances to really show us like world-class CS. He hasn't essentially had what m0NESY had the last half of last year, where you're in the real games, the real mixing up with the top teams. You get to see what you're capable of. So I think individually they're all fine. I don't actually mind the moves, but I do think there's going to be some difficulties with this squad. Like, I'll give you an example. I think an obvious problem they have to me is everyone except m0NESY. It's another scenario like I was saying about Eternal Fire. Everyone except m0NESY should be like a number 2 in another team, or a number 1. You know what I mean? Like, I think you're going to have a hard time figuring out who's at the bottom of the pecking order in this one, or who like gives up slack to others, etc. And so I will say, I do think Snacks absolutely has his work cut out for him in this one. Like I said this earlier, I think, by the way, he had nothing to do with G2 beating Bait. I just don't care what anyone says. Like, that was literally just m0NESY on CT side, almost like an actual joke on one of the rounds. Just decided not to lose the game. He just decided to kill everyone with the AWP. It was bonkers. So I think m0NESY is in for a fucking even harder time of hard carrying. Like, here's my prediction. This will be like the Huxley era of when they had m0NESY in CS2. And m0NESY had to, for real, be like the best player in the world to win games. And even then, sometimes wouldn't win like a big semi-final. Like, I've always said this. People forget this because they have such short memories and they're so recency biased. m0NESY was the best player at the PGL Copenhagen Major. And I don't even think that was like some outrageous statement. He smurfed. He did nothing wrong in that tournament. His team couldn't win it. And then GL had that amazing ancient game for Na'Vi. That's it. Aside from that, he'd been in the final and he had a crack at winning the fucking major almost on his own. Like, I think he is an unbelievable player, but I'll tell you what, I think it's going to get hard for him when there's no, because this is where what you're going to find with Nico, if you're a casual fan, is some of these guys can do Nico things on their screen, but the real thing that makes Neo insane is that he's not only one of the best and most skilled players, he is a master of the game. He's another player where if you were asking to complete like your style, mate, he is the archetype of how you play an aggressive rifle with like semi-lurk components and you can have secondary calls. Like, this guy is probably the best maybe ever at doing that in CS. Like, if you think about it, I don't even know anyone in history even who's as good at doing that. That's why people say he's a GOAT rifle in terms of skill, but he is in terms of his style too. So I think like the problem you have is the immediate thing that is going to expose Snacks is, I'm sorry, they said it in interviews, Maui. To me, I'm sorry, so many of those moves that Nico himself made late round in last year's G2 just look like he made that call and he was just the one choosing to do it. It doesn't look like anyone told him, like Carrigan-esque, like, rotate off now, they're going to come out, or Cadian back in a row. It doesn't look like that was going on at all. It just looked like Nico made that decision. It's why, actually, I think the joke of that latter team is they maybe even were being cheeky when they were like, Nico's decided not to IGL, Snacks is doing it. It's almost like they did the job half and half to me, you know what I mean? Especially because Nico was such a pivotal player on the T side. So I think without him, it's going to be really tough. Like, what's wild is, this is where I actually do think Snacks is going to get a bit exposed, because on paper, I don't think anyone hates this roster and thinks they're all shit. But I'm with Alan. I think there's a world where this team for real can just be like the 8th or 9th best team, and that's not going to be good enough. Especially if m0NESY's smurfing. Like, that's going to look really bad for everyone who isn't m0NESY, I'm afraid.
I guess there's some eyes on Taz as well.
Oh, true. He'll also be in the targets.
He has got a
That's
seriously tall order. And as we're saying...
By the way, in reverse, if these teams succeed, I'll give both these people more credit than the night before, certainly. Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, for the fans, that's why being critical sometimes is good, because we have to set real expectations.
I agree.
And if they make this lineup work, it wasn't a given, like it might have been with some previous G2 teams that should have gone further.
Oh, by the way, on that thing you were saying as well, the whole youth thing, I definitely agree with that. The problem you have is this. If you're just talking about like a group stage game, these young talents absolutely can be better than, like here's an obvious example. m0NESY is obviously a better player in the latter half of that year in a group stage game than ropz is. But who would you want in a big semi-final? You would take ropz, wouldn't you? Because he's just got the experience. By the way, I'll give you an underrated aspect. You were a coach, Allan. I think the most underrated aspect of more experienced players is it's that logic of like you can actually find a way to be useful when you're having a bad game. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like a young player just lines up and takes his shots and misses and goes like, "Fuck, I'm gonna hit it next time." A veteran player finds a way to be useful in the game. Do something else, play like a conservative game. Sometimes play off someone, take a different spot or something. There's other ways to sort of skin a cat if you're a veteran.
I mean, don't underestimate the amount an experienced player can make everyone else look good as well. Don't, obviously, it's when we're watching games or analysing games or whatever, and we're looking at clips, it's too easy to focus on the highlights or the frags or whatever, the mechanical skill. But Counter-Strike's really a game of communication. That's what the whole game is. And if you're losing someone of NiKo's caliber, for me, NiKo...
You can't replace him, can you? You can't replace him, Allan. Come on.
I think he's the most valuable player in the world because of what he brings to a team. In the past, I would have said it's Device for similar reasons, because he's just vocal. He's incredibly good at his positions. I mean,
by the way, for people who could overreact, Allan, obviously you think Donk can shoot harder than NiKo, but the difference is Donk doesn't have all the secondary calls and experience. That's what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, I mean, Donk is a fantastic player, but as we're saying, if we're building a lineup, I need a spread. I need the NiKo to balance the m0NESY.
Yes.
I need the NiKo to balance the maups.
Yes, that's fair.
I don't necessarily have that. And as Maui's saying, I mean, someone like Hunter, he probably realised it. I've got to speak 10 times more on this team.
Sure.
I've got to make great calls. I've got to help with the mid-rounding because, maups is still learning his positions. Heavy God is a big jump up for him. Obviously not a first language.
Yes.
Snacks is probably still adjusting to in-game leading. Taz is reasonably new to coaching. There's a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah.
And outside of m0NESY and Hunter, they're the only stalwarts in this team. So I guess for those two, they got to look at themselves and say, we need to be the core of this team because everybody else has got so much shit to figure out right now.
By the way, I understand, obviously, they've only played one match with the new lineup. But even in that match, I think you saw a bad omen for the future. Because remember how in the past, this is why I always said, actually, people to some degree overgassed m0NESY. Because the way they overgassed him is they already made it sound like he was like 4% off being NiKo. It's like, skill-wise, yeah, of course he can hit a headshot. But what you saw in the old team is, because you had NiKo and m0NESY, it was more like, to me, if m0NESY shows up, then you win. That's how it works. Bro, that first map is really scary because m0NESY was absolutely on his game going great and they couldn't win against fucking bait. Like, that's where I get scared because, bro, that's what, for me, essentially, m0NESY was like the most OP third player. If he has to come in and buoy up, he could have to be a 1 and 2 option in this team now. So I need again, it's going to be m0NESY and m0NESY better be insane this year. We're going to have a really good fucking run. Right, let's go to your point then, Maui. What is it? Come on.
And mine's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. It's just that, we obviously like the ropz move for vitality and everything like that. And, I was just kind of saying stuff about why ropz can be better than Spinx, but I still think Spinx deserves a team. Like, that's my bad point. It's just like, why is he not connected with any team right now? I don't know.
True.
I don't know why he's just sitting on the waiver wire and we're just wondering, where is he going next? Because I don't really... now that it's kind of taking shape.
By the way, has there ever even been a rumor? Has anyone ever even? Because nowadays you have a million bullshit rumors. I've never even seen a rumor of a team he's joining. No one's even ever hinted at one. It's weird.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Like, I don't know where he goes right now. Like any top 10 team, I think like weird but like okay fits would be m0NESY, but I don't see how they're gonna break up this kind of core. But like another one would probably be like Falcons. But again, like I think they kind of need to keep the core that they have for that roster too. Beyond that. Now you're out of the top 10. And it's like, yeah, Spinx had his deficiencies in certain ways, interpersonal and probably on CT side for me, but he definitely deserves a top 10 team. So yeah, bad points just simply like, where the hell is Spinx going?
Yeah, I mean, agreed. I mean, obviously in our discussion earlier of Spinx to ropz, I mean, the granularity we need to focus on these teams to win majors, to win the best tournaments in the world, is you need to have no failings. And failings is probably the wrong word. You need to lack the advantages that maybe another team has. So to just say that Spinx is a bad player is wrong. It's incorrect. It's a logical fallacy. So yeah, he definitely deserves a team. He probably, in the way that he played his best stuff on Ents, he probably needs a team where he gets to, play his positions more. He gets more say over where he's going. Maybe he got that in the end on Vitality. He certainly didn't at the start. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure where he's going to go. Maybe Heroic, and then new look lineups. Mouse is just too good, aren't they, at the moment to rock the boat? So potentially Heroic is the only team I look at and say maybe there. Potentially Gamer Legion. But again, this isn't the same caliber of team he was on. So I don't see a way around it, guys. I think Spinx might have to drop down a decent level and have to play himself back into form, which we're pretty sure he can.
Yes.
Play good yet again. So he might have a rough year ahead of him.
This is where I don't know if he gets this, because actually he's not a player, by the way. I have like connections with and talk with and, know what their headspace is like, whereas there are pro players that are like that. So as a result, the real problem I have is he's not a person, if you notice, who's very much on camera or ever tries to like give his talks. Like, in fact, even him just clarifying that apparently he like sort of chose to be benched or whatever, if it's true, is actually quite a forthcoming. Like, you don't even normally get that information. So the biggest problem is, to me, he's completely a black box. No one can know what's going on inside his head or what's going on. And so one of the issues I don't know if he himself gets is, bro, the reason you're not on a team right now and why no one's trying to pick you up has nothing to do with your skill level. It's not some idea like I complain about people underrate you or something. No. Everyone knows you're easily a top 20 player and you could easily be like a second or third option on a bunch of teams. The real problem you have is this. Teams talk, mate. And all those things behind the scenes from Vitality, the other players and the coaches hear about that, mate. They at least even hear the idea that there might be problems, or maybe that guy is an issue, or he is causing disruption, etc. So the reason I bring this up is, even though I think it's a slam dunk for a bunch of teams, like I was looking through the top 10 myself, Alan, when you were saying that, there's a bunch of teams where if we take out like intangibles like outside of the server, by the way, I even said it when the move was announced, ropz Vitality, if it wasn't for the fact they were getting a leash, you could have done Spinx to FaZe. Like, I'd love to see what Carrigan would do with a player like that, because I'm thinking to myself, maybe Carrigan can do to Spinx what Snappy did. Maybe he can like revitalize him and build the team around him and make him really skilled and give him what he wants, etc. Then you think of like, by the way, G2 themselves. Spinx, what are you doing wrong, mate? Where Heavy God's going into teams like this, but you're not getting the call up. Like, mate, you're better than a bunch of the people in fucking G2. You said Mouse already, but the problem, obviously, role for role in Mouse is you probably have to take Brolan's spot. One of the things Brolan does in that team, guys, isn't just be like a good player. He seems to bring no drama to the team. He seems like a super chill guy who just like does his job, and he doesn't complain. So here's the problem: is every one of these teams, there's just a reason to go against you, even if you're the better player. By the way, I'll give you another team that's, I think he's better than their lurkers. Team Liquid. But the problem is, their lurkers have none of those baggage. Their lurkers are the best, most chill guys in the team, willing to do whatever you ask, not with a big ego. So the real problem is this. There's plenty of people who would probably want his game, but I don't think anyone wants his game plus whatever might be lurking inside his social interactions or his dynamics or whatever his ambition for the game is. So the weirdest thing to me is this. I at least assumed, maybe I give you too much credit, Spinx. I assumed all the drama last year was you knew what location you wanted to go to. And it's like the NBA, man, where you're just trying to force your way out. You're trying to sort of like bench yourself and then cause drama. And then it's like, you just know you're trying to make it like, don't just sell me to that team. But there isn't a team. That's the worst part. And so the worst thing is when I look down, bear in mind, you're probably not getting into any of those teams. You go down. The reason everyone always brings the Falcons ones up is that's what keeps making it awkward that there's potentially the nationality angle, because Falcons is desperate for a player like Spinx. They just can't get him. So and you go and look, bearing in mind in the current world, we actually have a bunch of top 10 teams again who are all nationality based, like Eternal Fire, Mongols, even Astralis, etc. So you can't join those teams. The real sad thing is this. You actually, for real, are going to either have to sit on the bench, which at this point I suspect he's going to do, by the way, and just hope that after the first season someone needs this player, maybe from one of those teams, is willing to take the gamble, and then he becomes the JKS Dexter, emergency pickup, as it were. Because aside from that, you're going to, for real, end up on squads that are way below your level, like, I'm not joking, Fnatic, NIP, bloody hell, at Complexity at this point in time. You know what I mean? Like, there's just not better squads to get him, mate. I don't know where he can go. He's trapped.
It really might just be like NIP and Snap just tries to get him after a while. Like, I don't.
Which, by the way, for Snappy and NIP, great move. But if you're Spinx, like, bro, you went from, like I just said earlier, you went from could have won everything in Vitality to you're going to like try and make NIP relevant. Like, that's a nightmare. What's going on with your career, mate? What is it? Like, all I'll say is this. I'll just put this out there. I can't know what went on inside the team, but I make a prediction. I don't know if Spinx is a very, like, self-reflective person. I think in about 6 months from now, Spinx, you will look back and go, maybe the grass was pretty green in that Vitality roster, as you're watching z1o and fucking ropz just pass trophies to each other, and then ropz going, like, another MVP, sir, z1o? Like, you know, like, you're going to fucking wish you were in that team again then, mate. Suddenly it'll be worth taking whatever it was, an A beating, someone disagreeing with you, someone taking your spot, whatever it was, that's going to seem worth it. That will seem like a price worth paying. Because I'll just put this out there. That is one thing, no matter what anyone thinks I think about z1o, unless you're actually going to Duncan and m0NESY's team, you are a lunatic if you try to get away from z1o in his career at this point in time. Like, you must just hate winning, bro. Like, I don't get it. Like, when you get, I've always said this, that's why, by the way, I've actually critiqued NiKo so much in his career. If you try to get away from, like, great IGLs and teammates, I don't know what you're doing, mate. You're just making a rod for your own back at that point in time. Like, I'd want Carrigan and Alexi B as my IGL. I'd kind of like z1o as my Opera. I don't really get what's not to like, but again, maybe we'll find out in an interview one day. Right, my bad point is actually one that went completely under the radar. And all I'll say is this. It's not about Astralis, but it's a mad indictment on the Astralis org that no one even mentions this. Bro, think about it. We've all watched most of CSGO history, right? Everyone knows the crazy thing about CSGO is, if you don't know, think about that Hall of Fame that just happened with the 1.6 players. 1.6 was a game dominated by Sweden. CSGO was a game dominated by Denmark. There was no player in the top 20 from Denmark. We're all just going to ignore this. Like, that would have been impossible in some of the past years. Like, literally, even when Astralis was dodgy, you'd at least have Device there, or Blame F, or Stown, obviously, winning Heroic. It's actually insane how mismanaged somehow the Danish scene has been, that genuinely not a single player deserved to be in there. Look, I'll put this out there. On pure eye test, like we do with Dantares and Elise, maybe Stown could have been in there, you know what I mean? Maybe he could have done it, or Blame F, like, I guess he wasn't in good enough teams. But these players, eye test-wise, are good enough. But it's just a state of the Danish scene right now that they legitimately had, by the way it's calculated, 0 top 20 players. That is actually inconceivable to me. I can't even imagine popping out of a time machine even 3 or 4 years ago and telling people, oh, Denmark just isn't even relevant in the top players in the world. Like, that's just an alien concept. It's blown my mind. Thoughts, boys? Turns out Danish CS is, in fact, not a hell of a drug. There you go. There's the old joke.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like the guy that they had, the two guys that probably should have been top 20 based off of skill alone were Device and Blame F in the previous year.
Yes.
But Blame F got hard done by Astralis in what I still assume is a move to clear salary, essentially. And for Device, it's kind of because he decided to take off the last couple months of the year, last few months of the year. Taking off, it was Singapore plus the RMR in Major.
He was ill, and then he just took the rest off, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So those two, I think that there's a solid chance that they get some more people back into the top 20. I'm not really going to say that I truly believe in Denmark's chances to get a 5-man team. Like, this Astralis team is fine, like Device, Katie, and Stown, Yabby, Stare, but like, I don't really see them as a top 6 team in the world, like breaking into that top 6 that were so strong last year. One of them, sure, one of them can fall off or whatever, but there's other teams that I think I would take them over this Astralis first. Like, one guy that's kind of came up onto people's radar lately, and we'll see if he's able to deliver in playoffs, is Tessus. So we'll see if Tessus can actually keep up the form he's held for the last 4-ish months. And so, but beyond that, yeah, no, it's... I mean,
lucky, I'm just going to be a hater and give that credit to NiKo. And go, NiKo's so good, he got Tessus in the HLTV top 20. I'm a dick like that, but it's all good.
Exactly.
I'm seeding that ground already.
Fair point, because he's probably going to get him the deep tournament runs, honestly. Then the stats from the group stages will sometimes look more justified, even if he didn't necessarily play well in the playoffs. Nah, but like, beyond that, I think this is more a symptom of a mismanagement of Astralis and a lack of like a true Danish team where the players can all like build off of each other. Like Sashi, Ecstatic, those kind of rosters fell off, really. I mean, they just didn't really have the talent, I guess, but... Nah, like the actually really strong Danish individuals right now kind of went through it with Blame F and Device last year for me.
I mean, don't forget as well that Heroic obviously fractured the Canadian team, and then also you lose people like Magus to Falcons, so he's not playing domestically, so you have spread at Snappy as well. You have spread the talent pool pretty wide, but no, it's unbelievable that there isn't a better Danish team. Obviously, you're going to look at Astralis first and foremost and question some of the roster moves. I do think they still have they're kind of bizarre team where they're definitely worse than the sum of their parts. I mean, there's no doubt about it. They've got so many good pieces on that team.
Yeah, I agree.
But it hasn't translated whatsoever. Obviously, device maybe taking some time off is a factor, but yeah, for the it's a bit like Brazil for the last few years.
I see what you mean, because you have the talent but not the top team, right?
Yeah,
right.
And also because of just contract scenarios.
Yes.
To make the best Danish team, you need to get some players out of Astralis. It's not possible. You need to get some players, maybe like m0NESY, into Astralis. Just impossible, unless somehow he gets out of Falcons. There's just no way to do it. And as Maui mentioned, the second, third, fourth best Danish teams are nothing close to what they were in the heroic days.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not like the second best Danish team is going to make some shrewd moves and then jump up a level. So yeah, they're in a really tough spot. They also lack for an organization of decent caliber that's committing to the scene beyond Astralis, which isn't helping. If heroic, for example, had stayed Danish, I think you could probably build maybe a borderline top 20 team. And work towards something, but they don't even have that at the moment.
Yes.
For me, maybe someone that for me, the jury's not out. I don't think Glaive's done. I still think Glaive can lead a world-class team. And I'd be very intrigued if at some point he does get a shot with a collection of good Danish players. Again, maybe not quite the caliber that Astralis has right now, but if I was going to build a new Danish team, I would be tempted to do it around Glaive. And he is someone that, contract-wise, or maybe someone might go in that direction if they're not having results. That, for me, is the most realistic way out.
By the way,
the most realistic way out might be Glaive.
Shout out to Glaive, though, where he actually did make me look like an absolute tosser at that Elisa event, Maui, where I had them say to him with veracity, you should just make a fucking Danish team. Because, by the way, I am right, by the way. Like, in the long run, that would be the fastest way to get to number one again. But then he obviously fucked around and actually won with that collection of, rando slash for Academy squad. So he made me look like an idiot in that one tournament. But I think my bigger point was a valid one. Because, again, by the way, you've actually also backed into one of the issues there. I agree with you. It's not the lack of talent, but they're just not. To get on the top 20, you have to be in a team that gets you in position to be a top 20 player. And if you think about the real problem they have there, is all the IGLs that you'd build a Danish team around don't play in Danish teams now. Obviously, Heroic has Danish players, but they have Kixon. Well, they did before. Now they have a totally different squad. Like, fucking Snappy's obviously probably going to be an international player forever now. Carrigan's going to be an international player forever now. Cadian's an international. Well, I guess he's on fucking Astralis, but nobody knows if he's going to stay there. I feel like you haven't put the pieces together. You haven't put them together. Shall we go to the ugly then? Alan, what is your ugly point?
So my ugly is that, kind of being the lesser of multiple evils, I think some teams should sign a sixth player.
Ooh, okay, that's a spicy take.
The reason for
that's a take from about 4 years ago, but okay, let's go for it.
I know.
Did you just get a DM from Nivera or something?
Bubsky, maybe. I don't know.
There you go. Okay.
So for me, the way
Astralis does need a six man, don't they? You need someone who can just hop in there, bring a bit of experience. I love it. I love how stupid that take.
Why not? The way I came to this was right with the Valve ranking system. It biases towards prize money. It biases towards playing in a lot of the big tournaments. Okay. You know you're getting invites if you're already a pretty well-ranked team. And equally, if you have 2 months where one of your players isn't playing, oh my lord, that could do horrendous things. Especially if you're in the top 10 to 20. If you just slip a little bit too far out, you're not playing anything. Or you're playing a lot less, and you have way less of a safety net, or you're playing qualifiers rather than direct qualification. So I think in this new world, teams can't afford to either pull out of tournaments because their player needs some time off or whatever, or a visa situation. And I don't think they can also afford just to sub somebody in last minute and play like shit and get no ranking points. So my only way around this is probably to go around having 6 players on the roster, and also in the current state of CS. Some teams like a big have got around this by having their academy teams, NIP as well.
Sure.
And that isn't really an option. Some teams still have academy teams, but it's not nearly the same number. Right. Whereas maybe 10, they were probably 10 decent academy teams a couple of years ago. That's not the case anymore. So in the current landscape, for me, the best thing to do is to sign probably a younger up-and-coming player, get them under contract. Maybe you could even loan them to another team. with clauses where you can recall them if they're needed to stand in. So I don't think it's perfect. It obviously hasn't worked out brilliantly in every scenario, but I don't necessarily see a better solution than having an extra player on the payroll right now.
Okay.
Oh man, like 6-man discussions, bringing that one back.
I'm not necessarily talking to the level of subbing between maps.
Yeah, he doesn't mean like a pure rotation. Yeah, he means more to pick up the slack if you want to attend 5 events in a row, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I'm talking more in terms of having someone that can stand in last minute and knows what they're doing and knows the team.
Yeah, I just think that the draw of a paycheck that's going to consistently come is tempting for a lot of people. But if I were a player, I would probably not try to do that because I think everybody just wants to be a starter. And I guess like if you're really getting picked from the weeds and you're getting tapped by like a Liquid or something, and then they say like they if Liquid put a 6-man on their roster and it is a North American guy or something like that, that seems like one of the few reasonable options here. But if it's something like, I don't know, like if I were getting signed by like a team that's like tier 1.5, like I don't know what it would even be really at this point. I guess like a VP or something like that. I just kind of would be a little. I feel like you should just learn from what has happened to a lot of 6-men in the past, where you're just kind of riding that bench for a long time, and a lot has to break. And I almost feel like I almost also think that it's almost like if I'm joining a team that's employing like this strategy, then I feel like they might be signing people in bad faith in a way too, because I just think that it's from the financial standpoint that, oh, you just want to sell me later or something. Like I'm not really feeling like you're entrusting me in the same way as if a Gamer Legion just says you're on my starting 5, and sure, Gamer Legion's worse, but if it was like a Liquid as my 6, like as a 6-man, like do I really think I'm ever going to take JKS, NAF, Nerds, Twist, or Ultimate's position? Probably not. Like that's just, so I just think I would be personally a skeptic, and that's kind of the counterpoint I bring to this, where it's just, I think some players are going to just do it because they would just want to be on contract and salaried, but for people that have a little bit more disposable income that they don't need a salary tomorrow, I feel like it's probably better for them to just kind of grind with a 5-man lineup, because then you just get to play way more officials.
The thing for me is I can see what Allan means. Like, he is right, by the way. One of the things you will find after this year particularly is you will have a whole bunch of players, again, ringing the bell and complaining that they're burned out and that they've had too many tournaments, and then people will play. By the way, I actually will say mad props to Na'Vi and Blade for not even using that as the excuse. Like, they could have leaned on that really hard at that major, because it was true. They were in every bloody final, like, and they were traveling all around the world. And so, like, I'm sure they were at their absolute limit of, like, fatigue or whatever. Like, that's totally human. So I actually think that, like, if anything, people overlooked that last year. I think this year there's a real chance people could get, like, burned out. By the way, forget even just, like, mental burnout. If you just get ill for an event, like Alan's saying, it could fuck you, like, 3 months of your cycle up, mate, of where you are in the rankings, and then where you are next, and then if you have a bad tournament after that, suddenly you're, like, in a bad spot as a team. So actually, even just having someone who could enter the game and play, like, a bunch of normal rifle roles probably would be valuable. Bearing in mind, one thing you cannot do anymore, it just doesn't work anymore, guys. We're not playing online EPL games. You can't actually have your coach who hasn't played in years as a pro or ever be your stand-in. Like, that's just an auto loss against the top team at this point in Counter-Strike. Like, you're not going to win that game. Like, that, it was funny when people could do it before in silly online games. That's not going to happen at LAN. Like, you're not going to actually bring your coach in and then go, like, semis in the tournament. So at that point, going to the tournament for everyone who isn't the player who's ill is almost a write-off. You're just doing it because you're getting paid and you have to turn up. Like, it's just your job to be there. It's like fucking, the joke is, it is like those ones where those sports stars have to go and do the press conference even though they don't want to do it. They just turn up not to get fined. In that analogy, it's going to be like that. So I would just say this, the actual angle, sadly, I think Allan nailed is, this whole problem doesn't have to exist if everyone did have a real academy squad. It's just that obviously costs money, and then you have to have somewhere to play. Because I'll give you the most obvious example to me of where you could do this and it could fulfill all these purposes at once, which is, how about this angle for you? You know, everyone keeps talking about the one where, how is it you're supposed to say the name, by the way? It's not Kiyosuke, isn't it? Like, what? How is it you're supposed to say it, Maui? Isn't there some other way you're supposed to say that name?
I think if you actually were constructing it with
Kiyosaki
like
or Kiyosaki or something like that. What is it?
Kaiosuke.
Kaio,
it would be like
okay, I don't know.
Kaiosuke. If you actually
everyone knows who I mean, though.
Japanese, that's what it would be. But he's a kid in Russia. So
basically, the player who everyone says is like Donk Jr., who's in the Spirit Academy squad. To me, he's a perfect example of that, of what we could be talking about here. Because one, you might want to put him in for a tournament if someone was ill anyway. Like, here's an obvious example. If Zontix was ill, you throw him in for one tournament because one, you have a chance to win still, and two, maybe it works out and then you're going to use him one day. So essentially, you could also be like testing him to see see at the next transfer window, do I actually want to gamble on bringing him into the main lineup? But also in that scenario, the key thing there is he has somewhere to play when you don't bring him in the lineup. He has another team to play in, and he has because I think the real problem is, like Maui said, is it. In a way, it's hard to tell the young player who is going to be the real sixth player. Like, I mean, should you join G2? Because if you get in the lineup, mate, it's going to be awesome and maybe you can replace him. But if you don't, you are also in a weird way sort of sat on the shelf and then no one knows how good you are and you're not proving yourself in like the equivalent of an OG or a lower team. I will say that'd be a tough spot to be in. I'm not even sure which way I'd go on that one. But I sort of get it. I'll also say as well, another angle you could do, but this would be very, very cynical, is if you think there's an obvious question mark to your roster, a role, an aspect you're lacking, you could intentionally recruit the sixth man to be that aspect so you could try A/B testing it in the lineup. But again, the problem with this is you have to have a pretty fucking big overview picture to do this. You can't be thinking event from event for event. I get what you mean, Alan. Essentially, there's a problem in the scene we just haven't got a solution to at the moment. That would be one potentially, though.
No, I mean, well, Jax can't play for everyone.
True.
He's trying to at the moment.
True.
One example would be in Formula
Obviously,
1,
the joke is everyone should just sign Spinx as their sixth player. Problem solved. I've took 2 points there. There you go.
One, you have reserve drivers.
Yes.
Where they fulfill a certain role behind the scenes. They'll get called up if there's whatever COVID case, injury. And they normally, the lower end teams will recruit from
right.
The reserve drivers. So I think there is a model. We did very briefly explore this on NP.
Yeah.
I couldn't get the management to agree to it.
Right.
But my idea was have somebody that's actually loaned to a much lower level team, and one that isn't going to, there's no conflict of interest. But you have clauses where you can activate it and bring them back to play a tournament.
If people don't know, it's a very famous thing in football, basically. So that's the classic model you use with young players.
It's obviously convoluted and it's complicated.
Sure.
But I think it could be done, and I think the advantage is, as you're saying, all you have to do is miss 2 tournaments because of burnout,
absolutely,
or something, and you've probably earned their paycheck and the hassle. So I think somebody should try it, and I wouldn't be surprised if somebody does.
Okay, I think it's a legit point. It's certainly an interesting one. Go on then, Maui. What is your ugly?
Yeah, it would be interesting if someone tried to implement it. I'm not like ruling it out entirely. Mine is just that for ugly, we might all be ugly haters because Threat, has that famous line that by January 2025 we need to be on top.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's unfortunate. It's actually nice for the competitive scene as a whole. The latest lineup for NIP actually could be on top. I actually look at this lineup and I think they could be top 10 in the. I'm not going to make that like a bold pred necessarily, but I feel like, this is because Snappy hasn't really proved anything in CS2, Eras Doce and U-Jerks. I don't really know how they're going to work on an international lineup. There's a lot of ifs here, but if NIP, they finally did actually put their money where their mouth was and made some big signings. And I think this is pretty cool. It's kind of like we're like finding and tempering expectations is one thing, but like this lineup is really interesting because you have a great support player that I've never really sold my stock on in Shush, even when he was having a downturn, actually, like for the last handful of months. Wrinkle is one of just my favorite players to watch, but I found his game a little bit one-dimensional, but it almost felt like the team forced him to do that because there was no other way into rounds for them. So I felt like they used him to a degree that they never should have. And then Erasdos and U-Jerks, I already feel like they're decently proven and kind of on the wrong end of seemingly, I don't know if this is really public information. It feels like there were negotiation issues with them and Saw, and they just couldn't really reach an agreement in terms of how much they felt like they deserved.
Well, they were doing like the NFL thing where you sit it out to force the contract signing. Was that the analogy you go for on that?
It feels like something like that happened behind the scenes. I can't really say.
It makes sense if you look at the timing of when they benched and all that crap. Yeah.
Yeah, I think their contracts were coming to an end, and they wanted to re-up with just higher salaries that Saw weren't. This is not a quote.
No, it's speculation, of course. Yes,
it's a bit of So, but yeah, no, and then Snappy. We finally get to see Snappy with a lineup that is actually kind of one that can rally around him a little bit more instead of one where he doesn't have to fight a voice here. Like that's my main thing. Like with him and Sonic, it definitely felt like there was at times like tournament to tournament watching Falcons. I just couldn't really gather an identity as clearly as I wanted to, because it felt like they're trying to fix too much all the time. And now with Exist worked very well with Cadian, if I'm being honest. Like, I don't know what Exist, it didn't seem like Exist was getting in the way of Cadian, because Cadian had a very singular style that he wanted to play. And so overall, I just think that the ugly point is just like, maybe Threat might have a point. Maybe they might be not on top, like they're not going to be an elite team, but I think they could. I think they could be, sniffing the top 10 in a few months with what they got here.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be nice to just see Snappy be able to lead for 6 months without colossal weight of expectation on him. That obviously he had on Falcons. I mean, the moment something goes wrong, you can only imagine the questions that are being asked. And I mean, I said it plenty of times on broadcast that if Falcons didn't work, one of m0NESY or Snappy had to go. It has to be a leader at the end of the day. So it's going to be nice to see him, just actually getting a chance to play consistently with a lineup and proving still call good Counter-Strike, which we all know he can. For me with NIP, it's a bit like the same with Fnatic. Is I always look back. Do you remember the moment? I think it was probably about April, May 2022, just around the Antwerp major, where they both made the decision to go away from domestic lineups and try and go international. And for me, they both did this because they're about, I don't know, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th in the world, and they weren't going up. And they both decided, let's take a risk and go international. And it didn't work for either of them. They never got back to the level they were with a more of a stable domestic lineup. So I thought NIP would go full circle and go full Swedish again. They obviously haven't with this team.
I mean, they were hinting at it with Radin Isaac and having those Swedish players, right? They were hinting they were maybe going to do it.
The last lineup felt like they were building towards that direction.
Yes.
They might have been that they were, and they didn't, because it might all hinge on getting this in-game
Fair
leader,
enough, right?
Or this couple of
Hampus
players,
or whoever it might be. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, they might have been in
Right.
contract negotiations and never got over the line. So I think I would have liked that more with NIP. Trying to build a domestic team, nicking some meta support players, for example, or something, and trying to build in that direction. I certainly don't dislike this team. I think you and Rosdos are good players. And said Shush, again, if he's playing on one of the best teams in the world, maybe he can come under question. But certainly at this level, he can anchor to a very, very good standard. And I'm guessing for you, Jerks and the Rosdos, their end of their time on Saw probably wasn't the best fun.
Yes.
The Rosdos move, as Maui touched on earlier, that was the one that was really sketchy from the outside, because there was public statements of Rostos just expressing interest to move, and then he's off the team just before the RMRs.
Yep.
And I was quite vocal when I had the opportunity to talk about it and saying that I thought it was an awful move. And it was just like indicative of we're not far enough along as a sport where a player can actually explore his options.
Yes.
And that, like, in the ways we're speaking about GMs, maybe like they're hunting around to see if someone like ropz is available. It's the same for the players. They need to have the opportunity to look at, what opportunities am I going to get? What spaces are open on better teams? If you're Unix and a Rosdos, you're the best player on your teams. You've just had miracle runs that, frankly, probably aren't going to be repeated. This is when your stock is highest. This is your chance to move. And yeah, if the SOAR organization really did stand in the way of them moving or not even let them explore the opportunities, that's a pretty bad look. They did come out in interviews and say maybe it's more complicated than that. And, you can certainly see a world where players throw toys out the pram when they don't immediately get what they want. But it wasn't a good look. And yeah, certainly for you, Jerks and the Rosdos, I hope for them that they're getting what they want out of this. I don't know if they will, but I hope they do. Because certainly they want to play for a top 15 team minimum, I guess. And it will be very interesting. I don't know what's going to happen with this NIP team. For me, there's too many questions to know, but it will be either way. It'll be quite interesting to watch.
I actually think this is another quite shrewdly done GMing job. Like I agree with Maui. Like it wasn't until the whole final roster came together I was like, they've actually got something here. What the fuck? Like they've went from being like, as you say, a team which was in a fucked up no man's land, which went like this. They looked like they had as their backup option, if all goes wrong, we just get Nork and ZTR or Hampus and we're Swedish again. It looked like that was the cynical pivot. But the problem is, because you had Wrinkle, who was far and away your best player, you'd be a moron to kick him out the team, wouldn't you? Like if you replace him with Nork, that's the like GM downgrade of the fucking year. Like the Brinkle guy, if people don't know, especially if he has a good team, is going to be like an HLTV top 20 player one of these days. If not this year, it'll be next year. Like he has the talent. So I think when you look at the pieces, what a shrewdly put together squad. The only player who's in massive demand is Wrinkle, right? I think everyone else is just a really clever pickup because actually those two players, Aristose and U-Jerks, right? The U-Jerks guy for me was clearly the best player in saw, but the Aristose guy showed some potential. These were the two players, by the way, that actually made that run happen. It wasn't like they were tactical masterminds and so. Look, I'm sure Berry did his job and fucking m0NESY tried to call well, and so, but it was these players fragging that got them those like wins over fucking FaZe and got them into the semis, etc. So to me, actually, they were sort of like decent enough players, and I even think the way they're added in this team is genius, and here's why. Because if you look at what you've done in this team, you know, I always tell you, I think the two most important roles in CS to nail for a squad is AWPer, or superstar player, basically, ideally star AWPer, and IGL, right? You've actually got a really good up-and-coming AWPer. IGL, we're essentially just hoping it's different to Falcons. By the way, I'll throw this out there. One of the things I think if you look back now, you can see in Falcons is this is why sometimes my theory of contrast doesn't always work. The reason I want contrast is I want creative tension. So I thought, right, the different styles of Snappy and Zonic could like form to make a whole, and then they'd be awesome. If anything, they got caught between the middle. You have the rush style of Snappy from CSGO, which couldn't work in this team. And then you have the super slow, like, we rotate everywhere like Na'Vi style of fucking Astralis with Zonic. And then they just ended up in some fucked up middle ground in between the two and did neither. And it just made them a whack generic team. Whereas you've seen in interviews, by the end, they were actually copying 3D Max's strats, which is like, you're copying off their homework, Zonic. So that's how you knew they were at the absolute end of that project. That could not continue on. So I think, first of all, I think Snappy can absolutely be rehabilitated. By the way, I can't wait to see a player like fucking Wrinkle play this guy. I think shush, I'm with Maui. Listen, he's not supposed to be a fragger. He actually overperformed like 3 months before the drop-off or whatever. Then he just had a really bad few months and he wasn't that great at the major. But I do think he does his job and clearly doesn't add an ego component to the game. And I think he's going to immediately love playing with Snappy and they're going to vibe. And then here's why I actually think that the Portuguese players are a banger gamble. Because, bro, look at the roles they play. These would be the easiest players to replace if it doesn't work. Like, by the way, as we just said earlier, if I'm Snappy, I'm not saying this to the players, Maui, but I'm thinking to myself, mate, if I need to, Spinx is just there. He's just over there, mate. I could take the same thing. How many fucking good aggressive riflers are there in Europe? We can replace them. But if we need to replace the saw players and the rest of the squad works, this is an easy pivot after season 1. You could actually like pivot this into like a real top 10 like roster on paper even. Because I think this could be a sleeper. Obviously, I am thinking of it more of like the last heroic lineup. Everything's going to have to work. All the pieces are going to work. Wrinkle's going to have to be awesome. They're going to have to get the style down. But you look at the squad, it is an underrated one on paper. I think a lot of people were out on these players, or just didn't see them as big factors in the big squads. But bearing in mind how the offseason went, I think they've sort of like backdoored in. I'm with you. They've backdoored in like a relevant lineup that I'll be interested to watch. I could see this being a fun team. Right, the last topic on the show, it doesn't have to be a huge one, but I thought this should definitely be in ugly, is actually going to be that post that Heccu just did. The famous person who was obviously an interviewer, sideline reporter, sometimes does desk hosting because a lot of people do that role, try and expand out. If you saw her post that she made, she basically revealed what, if you've been watching the events, you will know, which is she doesn't get hired to a lot of the big events. She's actually somehow almost like in her career regressed a step. She went from doing the biggest events to like now she's almost at like the tier 1.5 and the tier 2 events, or she gets hired for like the bigger events, but like the odd one, or like she's on like the not their biggest of them, like not their major, but like their like mid-tier big event, if you know what I mean. And the reason why that's so bizarre to me personally is, one, I actually think a massive selling point of her is, just like Freya, she is so clearly an authentic fan of Counter-Strike. She isn't someone who came from another game, or this is her career and she's like a BBC presenter, which is what I think a lot of the people who in esports are, almost like they're just willing to move between every game and they're just, you know, they've got an overall package. She's clearly a real CS fan. And then also, it is OP as fuck in the modern day of players that she can speak fluent Russian and English. That is unbelievably OP in a way I've yet to see another interviewer who can do that and flow between them. But the reason I put it in ugly is, look, I just think it's flat out bad she isn't hired to these events. I think she's really good, man. I think she's like a sleeper, one of the best at her role. But the reason I put it in ugly is I actually do think, I mean, if you don't know, she is someone who really does read loads of self-help books, but she's someone who actually does the cool thing, which is she seems to be able to extract like the one or two really good points from the self-help book, as opposed opposed to just getting caught up in the bullshit. If you don't notice, this post is a very reflective post. Like what she basically does is, instead of just blaming the world that she didn't get hired, she actually tries to like essentially look at what her own issues were as a talent and what she as a person wanted to develop in and grow in. So the reason I put it in ugly is I do think she made some very valid points in that post. And I actually think, by the way, if you're a talent or someone in a job where you aren't in this position you should be in, look, I would say to her privately, look, I do think you've been screwed over and they should hire you. But I'll tell you what, me telling you that privately doesn't help you get hired. Actually, first of all, coming out and being like, I have certain issues, I'm working on them, I want to improve in this way, I don't have vitriol against anyone. Notice there was no vitriol in that post at all. It was almost like she's saying, I could be better, so I'm going to make myself be better, and then hopefully I get hired again. So that's why I put it in ugly, because I thought actually some of it's bad, some of it's a bummer, but I also thought there was some in there that actually there's value you can take from that post. I actually thought, by the way, it was a very professionally put together post with a lot of like very reasonable reflection. Some might even say too generous, but hey, fair enough. She's willing to look at all the dodgy areas of what she perceives as a persona or a professional career. So I think that's a great attitude to have. So what are your thoughts, guys?
Yeah, I mean, I read this one when she first posted it, and I felt like, yeah, you covered it. It was incredibly reflective. Almost had like a life lesson in every paragraph, which was actually quite cool in terms of just writing in general. And I'll just echo the idea that for Heccu to be able to be as in tune with the CS space as she is, and to be able to on the fly translate between English, Russian, and even Portuguese to an extent, like that is just absurd. And I feel like it's actually criminal we're not using her talents on these broadcasts as it could be, because so many times we have to do this at the end of a segment. The production will come to us, okay, who do you want to interview on Spirit or whatever, and it's like, can only like two of them speak English, so it's like, so we're just like, whatever, we can't really do anything, it's like, I guess we're talking to Donk again, it's like, and he's just gonna say like 7 words. But if Heccu was there, like, imagine, I don't know if like Heccu, well, she can't speak Chinese, so at the Shanghai Major it would have been still awkward for everybody, but like she could have, like we need a little bit more from Donk at this point. Like, come on, like we're getting like these phrases that I'm almost just like, is he conveying himself in the actual way that he feels, or is he just not able to?
Bro, I actually feel like, for real, I think that he intentionally does meme sound bites to avoid actually having to do an in-depth answer. I almost feel like that's like the smoke screen, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, like I'm sure he can speak face-it levels of English, like make call-outs, but like I'd also, and I'm sure he's actually talked with people on different teams at times, but clearly Russian is his most comfortable language, and at that point he has no excuse, and so we could find out way more from him. I want to know more from so many teams that she can talk. Like, I don't know if people know this, but her last name actually translates to interpreter. Like, so she's like taking that on.
Okay, that's the fucking Matrix telling you, like, you're supposed to do that job. Exactly, that's some simulation shit. Yeah. That's ridiculous.
So she really prides herself on learning new languages and everything, and that's why she can speak a level of Portuguese. She can obviously speak fluent Russian, fluent English, and I think she probably actually can speak a couple others, if I'm being
well, the joke is she can obviously do Latvian. It's just the point is the Latvians all speak English. You don't need them. But in theory, we could do that if there was ever a young Latvian player that didn't speak English, bizarrely, in theory.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if she corrects what I say right now and says that she can speak 6 languages. Right. Like, that wouldn't surprise. Like, I'm pretty sure she's told me more. I just don't remember them. So yeah. As a
except
whole,
the joke is, Mauby, because she's Heccu, she wouldn't even go, actually, I speak 6. She'd go, I do speak 6, but I'm really trying to speak 9. But, I'm having to work on those last 3, and you're just like, fucking hell, okay, you're just unreal, mate, okay.
And I'll say, like, compared to what we have right now in the interviewer space, like, I actually... a lot of people say a lot of different things and take jabs at James Banks. I think James gets a good amount of stuff from that he can out of players.
He clearly knows players and stuff. Yeah, he's familiar with them. They're comfortable with him. Yeah.
But I think it's important for the scene to not just have the same person on every single event for the same role every single time. Like, I think variety is just important for just keeping the scene feeling fresh. Like, so and Heccu does that. Like, Heccu had some fun moments when she interviewed players in the past, like getting Brokey to say more. She had the big cards all rolled out, ready to go. She almost made it a skit.
By the way, the underrated one was all that shit she did with Perfecto and Electronic. Bro, she brought like an aspect out of them I've never seen before. They weren't even people who were on camera before me. That was wild, yeah.
Yeah. So I would give a huge vouch to Heccu, and not at like a comparison of 1-to-1 with her and James Banks. I just think, like, why not have both of them on the circuit?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's my main thing.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read the post, but obviously I've worked with Heccu. I know the rough deal of the scenario. This one's in the ugly, and we can all attest to this. Is kind of the reality of doing this job
Yeah.
as a freelancer is no job security. When you stop getting hired for big events, you rarely know why.
Yep.
And digging might do a lot more damage than good.
Yep.
If you did go down that route. So yeah, certainly for Heccu, there's no reason why skill-wise she shouldn't be working more events. There's no reason why she shouldn't have more opportunities. The one that stands in my mind, Maui, is, do you remember after the Rio Major Final when she interviewed James? And it was carnage. There was whatever, people everywhere. There was confetti, and obviously James doesn't have the best English at the best of times. And she managed to get some decent answers out of him. And I kind of remember sitting in that green room at that moment and thinking, nobody else could have done this.
Yes.
Nobody else could have actually got any of those Virtus Pro players to say anything significant.
Well, remember when Spirit did win, Alan, some of them were just saying nothing. They were just sort of like,
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like
those real.
these are like career-defining
Absolutely.
moments.
Yes, exactly.
Career-defining moments, and to not have anybody there, or I mean, maybe it doesn't just have to be Heccu. Maybe it could be, for those moments, you get somebody from the Russian broadcast to actually be out there that has decent English. But there is massive scope to do this more. And certainly after Rio and the performance she made, I thought she was a lock for the next whatever.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
6 months, year, not to mention how many of the top teams are either fully Russian speaking or have a lot of components that are Russian. And even if they play for international teams, players, as we've seen, are a lot more comfortable talking in their native tongue if it's in a situation like an interview where it's they're not used to that. And Heccu was pretty decent, so it was always a surprise she didn't get hired more. And something else on this line is, and certainly you guys would have seen this throughout your times being broadcasters, is it always is bizarre to me that TOs, let's say some of the TOs feel like Heccu has some stuff to work on. Why don't they just fucking tell her?
Yes.
Why don't they just tell her that, maybe Heccu at the start, she, not being a native English speaker, maybe she didn't pronounce things quite right, or she needed to slow down a bit when she talks. Maybe these are fair criticisms, but why couldn't somebody just tell her?
Absolutely, yeah.
It really isn't a big deal to fix it if she knew about this sort of stuff. So I think that's another angle here, is if I was in a decision-making department for an ESL, for a Blast, and I was looking at the sprue of top teams, I was looking at the stuff she had done, and I would just look at her and say, this isn't that hard to mold her into exactly what I want.
Yeah.
And if, so like take an ESL, for example, there are people like Tom Eric behind the scene that absolutely could take on this role of working with a talent member to just iron them out a little bit. But to my knowledge, I could be wrong in terms of the last couple of years, but I'm guessing Maui, it's still the same, that you get very little communication.
Feedback is like the rarest thing. It's just the rarest thing ever. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, and that's why, and we can also test this, Flashpoint felt so different to any other event I've worked. Because we knew we had you, Duncan, and Monty, who would just tell us if we had things to work on. And you actually felt like they wanted to build that relationship. And I haven't really felt that outside of a couple of TOs, certainly never with ESL. So I think that is just a systemic problem of this freelancer landscape, is that I don't think these TOs are working with their talent nearly as much as they could be. And someone like Heccu, I mean, let's not beat around the bush. She's also would have been a lot cheaper than the other options.
That's true as well, yeah, absolutely.
As well,
yeah.
So why not take on a Heccu over some events maybe a Shox would have gotten, lesser day rate, work with her a little bit, get her to do some, I don't know, some opening stages of a Kato or a Cologne, and work on these things she might need to work on. Like, it's, to me, from a broader outside perspective, it just seems so easy. Especially coming from a coaching background where this is how you build teams.
Yes.
Is you don't just arrive on day one and this player is exactly what you want. And to expect that from talent isn't necessarily fair. And certainly from being in that landscape, it is hella difficult to actually know what you need to work on. You all you can do basically is watch yourself back, watch other people, and just sort of infer stuff. You maybe get a couple comments a year of what actually to work on.